You're listening to Signals from the Core, a podcast about adventuring in the core sector of the Mongoose Traveller 2nd Edition role-playing game. This is where the bureaucracy is dangerous, the nobles are lethal, and where power, paranoia, and prestige collide. I'm Captain Aurelius, and I'll be your host. In each episode, we explore the tangled heart of the Third Imperium through original story hooks, people of interest, encounters, locations, and the tools you need to bring high-stakes, low-trust campaigns to life. If your crew is headed for the throne world, buckle up, because here in the core, secrets don't stay buried. Not for long. Today's episode is all about the Imperial Bureaucracy and how it operates in the core sector. We'll look at how the system is built and why it creates such rich territory for adventures, and how you can use it to generate patrons, complications, and intrigue at your table. I'll also share my own take on using bureaucratic friction in play and how I use it for emergent storytelling opportunities, which is one of my favorite things to do in role-playing games. Then we'll look at what a new bureaucrat career could look like for Mongoose 2nd Edition, and close out with a referee's workshop on using the Diplomat skill in the core. But first and foremost, an apology. It's been more than 6 months since our last episode. The signal, dear listeners, went dark. And for that, I am sorry. At the risk of getting perhaps a little too personal, I've had a lot going on. Had some health things I've had to deal with. I was diagnosed with wildly uncontrolled diabetes and high blood pressure, which are manageable now. I just had to actually focus on actually managing them, which meant finding more time for healthier food prep and grocery shopping to fix my diet, exercising more, and really visiting doctors more frequently than, honestly, any human should have to do. At the same time, there were some leadership and team changes at my job, which brought on more responsibility, bigger time commitments there, not to mention just trying to fit in time with family around the holidays and just basically trying to keep my head above water. It's been an extremely hectic time. But I'm back. My heart never wanted to stop doing this. I just had some other things just conflicting. And, as they say, something's got to give. And unfortunately, the time to do this podcast just had to give for a little while. My sincere, heartfelt, and humble apologies, but also gratitude go out to folks like Rob, Richard, James, Dave, PJ, Walt, and anyone else who I might be forgetting who've emailed me over the last several months, along with a number of others on social media who reached out to encourage me to keep the podcast going and just saying, honestly, some of the best things about the show. I can't tell you how much that's appreciated and how it's really gone a long way in keeping my motivation to find a way to carve out time to do this podcast high. Thank you. Oh, and thank you too to Bob Lofton, the host of probably my favorite Traveller podcast going, the Safeco cast that he does with his buddy Jeff. He just said some of the best things about the show and gave me some great shout outs and kind words. So thank you so much, Bob. I love doing the show. I love Traveller, and I love imagining ways to bring the game to life in the rich, vibrant, dangerous setting that the core sector provides. So hopefully many of you are still with me, and we can get this thing back on track from here on out. I've never stopped planning episodes or thinking about running games in the core. So hopefully there are a lot more episodes of Signals from the Core in our future. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me on the show or any of your ideas for future episodes, let me know. Drop me a line at coresignalsmail at gmail.com. That's coresignalsmail at gmail.com. And you'll also find that email address in the show notes, so you don't have to remember it and type it into your email browser. That was one of the lessons from the first batch of episodes that we did, that somebody was like, why do you just keep repeating the email? Put it in the show notes, man, please, for the love of God. So you'll find it in the show notes as well. Also, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You might not think it helps, but it absolutely does, like a lot. So if you like the show, please consider taking a few minutes, just rate and review. It'll really help me out, especially since I screwed up and stopped doing the podcast for a little while. It's going to take a while for the algorithm to pick it back up and pay any attention. So if you can help me out there, I would really appreciate it. And share the show with your fellow travelers. Just kind of, if you follow me on social media, give it a boost, drop a link in your Blue Sky, Facebook. I don't know if anybody's still on X. Go ahead, drop it there. Maybe you're part of a traveler subreddit. Whatever you can do. I really appreciate it. I truly, truly do. Anyway, with that, let's get on with the episode. To me, the Imperial Bureaucracy feels like one of the most underused pieces of the Third Imperium setting. And in the core sector, it's always seemed to me like it could be one of the most powerful tools a referee has. But let's take a step back and look at the, quote, bureaucracy, end quote, as a whole. It's the mechanism that turns imperial authority into actual decisions, actual regulations and rulings. It's the red tape and their consequences across 11,000 systems, and how this creates a tapestry of intrigue, challenges, and obstacles for travelers to get caught up in. Every ministry, every customs office, every permit and filing and jurisdictional boundary is a potential adventure hook, a potential patron, a potential complication that makes your sessions feel alive. So in this episode, we're looking at how the Imperial Bureaucracy is structured, why it works the way it does, and how you can use it to generate adventures, create those complications, build those patrons, and make the core sector feel like a dense, politically charged, endlessly exploitable environment that would be fun at your table, because that's ultimately what we're all in this for, right? Is it going to be fun? So let's start with the quick version of how the system is built. And again, there's so much interpretation to that happens in Traveller, right? So I get it. I'm not going to be 100% on this, especially across versions. So much has been written. I'm trying to distill it to kind of what I've learned as still a relative newbie. So again, if you've got a different take, please reach out to me. Let's start a conversation. I would love to kind of have a back and forth on how you interpret things. So keep in mind, a lot of this is my interpretation, having dug into a lot of, especially the Mongoose materials, but some of the older materials, even some of the GURPS, GURPS nobility, reading some of that. So just bear with me and keep that in mind as we go through this, right? So remember, the big thing to consider and keep in mind here is how the Third Imperium is too big to run from the center, right? This isn't Star Wars or even Dune. Honestly, I mean, it's not even really Foundation, if you're familiar with those settings, right? This is 11,000 worlds, something like 20 plus sectors, and the fastest you can move a message is the speed of jump. So by the time a report reaches capital and orders come back out, the situation's already changed. So the Imperium doesn't try to micromanage its worlds. Instead, It concerns itself with what happens between them. Trade routes, interstellar commerce, starport regulations, naval bases, and the enforcement of these high laws, which are the limited but binding body rule of imperial law that every member world accepts, right? It's the hierarchy of nobility. Everybody agrees on that. The regulation of trade, the prohibition of certain weapons, right? No nukes are tolerated. And the rights of imperial citizens, right? No slavery is tolerated in the Imperium. You just, can't do it. That's when you're going to be visited by the Navy and put down hard and fast. Beyond that framework, worlds govern themselves. The Imperium governs the space between the stars, not life on the planets themselves. But to regulate the relationships, the trade, the information, and maintain some semblance of rule and law across that many worlds, across that many systems, takes a machine. And the bureaucracy is that machine. It's what makes that arrangement work. The emperor and the moot set law and broad policy. The emperor passes that down. The moot advises him, offers opinions. I mean, they're really sort of powerless, but, he does listen to them. They advise. But the bureaucracy writes the regulations that interpret those laws, decides what compliance actually looks like, and then spends years implementing, revising, or honestly, sometimes maybe quietly burying those regulations, right? Corruption is a fun thing to play at here. That interpretive role is where an enormous amount of power sits. A senior official who decides how a trade regulation gets applied or which worlds get priority for a starport upgrade is shaping imperial policy just as surely as the moot is, probably more so, to be honest. They're just doing it from behind a desk without an impressive title or heritage or family legacy behind it. And the system is formally organized into ministries. Justice handles imperial law in courts. Commerce oversees customs, shipping, trade regulations, and tithes. State manages diplomacy. Information controls and coordinates interstellar media policy and the official flow of news and public information. Propaganda? Censorship? You bet. Now, if you think the Imperium is above propaganda and controlling information, censoring information, well, then, I don't know, you're missing out on a lot of fun opportunity. Other ministries handle colonization, conservation, science, technology. We could have a whole other episode just diving into what all the ministries are or have been across the various versions of the game and how you could design them to work at your table in your Traveller universe. But the thing that matters most to me is that the nobility and bureaucracy feel deeply intertwined. Senior posts are held by nobles, as we know. We looked at the last episode. Or, if not nobles themselves, by commoners tightly bound to noble patrons through proxy. Dukes and archdukes oversee sectors and domains, but with the administrations staffed by bureaucrats who technically answer to a ministry on capital, but practically spend their days juggling a duke's priorities with whatever directive may have just arrived via courier from central office. On paper, the Imperium is unified, but in practice, a local duke's administration might drag its feet on a directive that cuts against their own interests or creatively interprets what compliance means in their sector or subsector. Authority flows downward through standing orders and standard procedures, trusting that officials on scene will apply them without constant oversight. But when that trust breaks down, you get audits, special commissions, and the dreaded investigator with an imperial warrant that overrides everyone else's authority. For a referee, that breakdown is pure gold. An auditor arriving in system with a warrant is an instant campaign event. Every official gets nervous, every record gets scrutinized, and everyone with something to hide suddenly needs help. And who can they turn to? The travelers. And that's where it starts generating adventures. Another thing to understand is that the people inside this machine develop fierce institutional identities. A Ministry of Commerce lifer thinks of themselves as a commerce person first. A justice investigator sees the world through justice's lens. An information official guards their ministry's prerogatives just as fiercely. They all serve the Imperium, but they serve it through their ministry. And when two ministries disagree about jurisdiction, policy, or priorities, the result can turn into a turf war conducted through memoranda, procedural objections, and the selective sharing of information. For a referee, that interministry friction is an adventure-generating engine. Your travelers might find themselves carrying a message that one ministry desperately wants delivered, but that another would very much like to see lost in transit. They might be hired by a commerce official to quietly gather evidence that a justice investigation is overstepping its mandate, or by a justice official who suspects commerce has been burying inconvenient audit results. The bureaucracy is a network of people with competing interests, and every one of them is a potential patron, obstacle, or a potential plot hook that you can use. And here's a detail also worth keeping in your back pocket as you're thinking about this. Every Imperial starport operates under extrality, meaning it sits inside a legal boundary where Imperial law applies rather than local law or planetary law, right? A traveler can step off a ship, walk across the starport concourse, pass through the extrality line, and find themselves under an entirely different legal system within just a few meters. That jurisdictional seam is also a goldmine. A crime on one side of the line is handled by Imperial authorities, but that same act 100 meters further out falls under local jurisdiction with completely different laws potentially. Your travelers can exploit that boundary, get tangled up in it, or find themselves caught between two systems that don't agree on much of anything. So there's some fun to be had there. Your travelers could bribe customs inspectors to look the other way. They can argue tariff classifications, exploit conflicting regulations between sector and Imperial authorities, or uncover how a noble's been bending ministry rules to serve their own aims or line their own pockets. They could be hired by a bureaucrat who needs a quiet team of outsiders for a job that can't be officially acknowledged. A customs inspection can be tense if they're carrying something that they shouldn't be. A permit application can be dramatic if the clerk has been told to stall them for some reason. A routine filing can become a trail of clues if someone has altered the records. The bureaucracy gives you a framework for creating friction and consequence without ever firing a shot. Now, everything I've just described operates across the whole Imperium. But if you're running games in the core sector, and that's what we're all here for, right? All of this gets turned up to 11. The core sector is the political and administrative heart of the Third Imperium. Capital sits here. The Emperor, the Moot, every major ministry headquarters, it's all here. If the bureaucracy is the nervous system of the Imperium, the core sector is the brain. Every form your travelers sign, every official they meet, every database they hack or subpoena they dodge here is plugged more directly into Imperial power than anywhere else in charted space. The density of administration in the core is unlike anything on the frontier. Out on the rim, you might have a single trade commissioner covering half a subsector, maybe the whole subsector. In the core, Entire office complexes serve a single regulatory function. There are whole office towers that exist purely so one department of one ministry has somewhere to file its cases and keep its analysts busy reporting findings for review or to flag up the chain for irregularities. For an adventurous crew, this density means more opportunities to interact with the bureaucracy directly and in person. Take a grav elevator to the 37th floor to argue with a mid-level functionary who can actually stamp the form you need, and so many things can happen. Who else gets on the elevator between floors? Random encounters abound. And when you arrive, that's a scene you can play at the table too, depending on how the elevator ride went. Because that functionary has a name, a mood, a supervisor breathing down their neck, and maybe a problem with your travelers, or a problem your travelers can solve in exchange for a little extra cooperation on their part. Or maybe he's got a problem with the travelers too. Were they late? Are they early? Does someone from the elevator shove their way to the front of the line and delay them even further? These are all things that you can play out. Capital itself is the ultimate expression of what we've been talking about with this bureaucracy. The sheer scale of government here is staggering. The administrative apparatus is a quagmire of possibility. Departments within departments, committees overseeing subcommittees, regulatory bodies whose original purpose has been lost to institutional drift, but which continue operating because nobody has the authority or the will to shut them down. The extrality principle that we talked about a little bit ago also takes on a different character here. On a frontier world, the starport extrality line might be the only place you encounter imperial law. In the core, imperial and local jurisdiction overlap constantly. A single commercial dispute might involve customs law under imperial jurisdiction at the starport, contract law under the local planetary code, and trade regulations interpreted by a sector-level ministry of office answering directly to capital, which again is so close, you can get rulings even faster. So things can spiral out of control much quicker here. Your travelers can forum shop, playing one authority against the other, or find themselves trapped between competing legal claims with no clean way out. This is where the bureaucracy's contradictions become the most visible. You can walk from a gleaming ministry complex to a shabby back office where an overworked analyst quietly decides whether a small shipping company lives or dies based on a single cargo classification. The same institution that manages trade at an interstellar scale can still have a clerk who misfiles a document and accidentally strands a crew on the wrong side of a customs seizure. At the table, you can play with that contrast constantly. Maybe the traveler's job is to deliver a sensitive report to a ministry official, but first they have to get past a clerk who won't release their docking clearance because of a data entry error that happened 3 systems back. And now they've got to untie that, unravel that, go back and unwind that through other red tape and other obstacles. The grand and the mundane collide constantly in the core. And that collision creates texture that makes sessions feel lived in. The proximity turns adventures in the core into a political pressure cooker. Bureaucrats here know they're only a jump or two from the emperor and the roots of power. Careers can be made or broken on a single case that catches the wrong official's attention, or the right ones. Ministries watch each other as much as they watch the rest of the Imperium. An investigation into trade irregularities might be as much about undermining a rival's influence as it is about honest law enforcement. That inter-ministry rivalry reaches its peak intensity here. On the frontier, thin staffing forces cooperation maybe. But in the core, every ministry has its full weight concentrated in a small number of systems. justice and commerce might both claim jurisdiction over a financial crime at a starport. Information might insist that a case involving intercepted data with media or propaganda implications falls under their purview. These disputes are expressions of institutional pride, competing visions of governance, and sometimes naked power grabs in the language of policy. For your travelers, getting caught between two ministries that each want to control an investigation is a scenario that kind of writes itself. Both sides need information, both sides want allies, and neither wants the other to get there first. And senior bureaucrats in the Corps are political players in their own right. The head of a major regulatory division on capital can shape trade policy across the Imperium by adjusting how rules are interpreted. Ambitious nobles court these officials as carefully as they'd court a subsector duke, because administrative power is the real power. And they're not the only ones courting favor, right? The megacorporations cultivate relationships with the bureaucracy over decades. They hire retired ministry officials who bring contacts and institutional knowledge into the corporate world, and they fund the careers of up-and-coming bureaucrats who might remember that generosity when they're shaping regulatory policy. This revolving door creates a web of obligation that's difficult to untangle and easy to exploit. A referee can build entire campaign arcs around a ministry investigation where half the investigators have former colleagues on the other side, or where a whistleblower needs the travelers to get evidence to the right official before the corporation's allies in the civil service bury it. And then there are the local elites, the Corps' ancient corporate combines, old-line noble houses, and powerful planetary governments who know how to work the system from the inside. They lobby ministries, bury unhelpful reports, and leak damaging ones at exactly the right moment. These are sophisticated operators who consider themselves near equals to the imperial center, and they play the bureaucratic game with centuries of practice behind them. For travelers operating in this environment, dealings with the bureaucracy are more political and more dangerous than anywhere else, but it's also more rewarding if you pick the right allies. Player characters might be couriers carrying sensitive reports between ministry offices, troubleshooters cleaning up a scandal before it reaches the moot, or free traders caught between rival departments issuing conflicting orders. The Corps is a place where knowing the right clerk can be worth more than a hold full of cargo, and where a misstep in a ministry corridor can ripple across sectors for them. So, if you sum it all up, the imperial bureaucracy is, like I said earlier, the nervous system of the empire, turning distant authority into specific actions and records across thousands of worlds. In most sectors, you feel it as a distant but firm presence. But in the Corps, you're walking through its brain. Everything is thicker, faster, more layered, more consequential. In the Corps, the bureaucracy is the adventure. Potentially. It's a living system full of people with agendas, institutions with competing interests, procedures that can be exploited or weaponized, and contradictions that create space for clever operators to make things happen. The gears behind the throne are always turning, and for a group of travelers willing to learn how they mesh, there's no richer hunting ground in all of charted space, in my opinion, than in the corridors of imperial power here in the core sector. Now, having said all that, I want to take a step back and talk about how I actually use this stuff at my table, because I can already hear some of you wondering or questioning whether there's any fun in this bureaucratic rigmarole. And when I talk about the Byzantine nature of the Third Imperium and its endless layers of bureaucracy, I don't mean to suggest that adventures should revolve solely around the party spending an evening rewriting someone's funding application. Scenes like that aren't meant to be the meat of the story. They're more like the flavor. They're the hurdles and favors your travelers have to navigate on their way to the real stakes or goals of an adventure. The point of including bureaucratic friction is to show how the machinery of the Imperium actually works. This is a civilization that governs 11,000 worlds through procedure, precedent, and delegated authority. Ministers expect their forms to be filed. Nobles expect their prerogatives to be respected. Functionaries expect the process to be followed because the process is what holds the whole thing together. That's the texture of life at this level, especially in the core sector where the bureaucracy is thickest and the scrutiny is constant. A permit that takes weeks to clear, a noble who demands some petty favor before they'll make an introduction, a committee squabbling over the phrasing of a trade classification. Instead of being boarded by pirates, you're dealing with inspectors, clerks, analysts. It's just kind of a mind shift of how you can set adventures here in this sector. There's a mundanity to that, which is exactly the point. Because what happens when, in the middle of all that routine and red tape, a body shows up? A dead clerk was just found in a ministry sub-basement, one the travelers had been seen arguing with earlier that morning. Or a mid-level administrator who's suddenly vanished between shifts after requesting the travelers meet in secret. Suddenly you're asking questions that transform the mundane into the urgent. Which policy was worth killing over? Which permit was someone willing to die to suppress? The routine is what makes the disruption land, if that makes sense. But these moments only work when they're tied to something larger. The more important the goal, the more hoops the traveler should have to jump through, and the more satisfying it'll feel when they finally get through. To secure access to a restricted archive, they might have to grease the right palms or navigate a contradictory filing process where two ministries have issued conflicting access protocols. To win the patronage of a noble, they might have to perform an absurdly minor service first that sends them down all sorts of rabbit holes. The kind of errands that remind them exactly where they sit in the pecking order. To move cargo across jurisdictions in the core, they might be forced to endure extra inspections at starports, seek redundant stamps from overlapping ministry offices, or thwart rival petitions from a megacorporate competitor who knows how to weaponize the regulatory process and use it against them. And within each of these seams and complications, there are opportunities for the unexpected. More random encounters, distractions, ways to get your travelers sidetracked into something they never saw coming. I'm hugely into emergent storytelling lately, which I kind of mentioned earlier. And bureaucratic friction here is one of the most intriguing ways to bring that in, to my mind. Every delay, every waiting room, every extra step they have to take in the process is a chance for something unplanned to walk through the door. In play, these obstacles serve as texture and contrast. They highlight the maddening, magnificent inefficiency of an empire that's been running on procedure for over 1,000 years, while making the espionage and political intrigue or the daring escapade that follows feel more earned. That journey through the red tape can give the payoff extra weight. Bureaucracy doesn't have to be the adventure itself, like I said earlier. But when used as the scaffolding that surrounds the adventure and intrigue, it's a great reminder that in the Third Imperium, even the most powerful schemes are built on a foundation of paperwork, permissions, and procedure. And in the core sector, where the gears are always turning, that scaffolding is taller, denser, and more tangled than anywhere else in the setting. So you got to ratchet it up. Now, that said, it doesn't have to be the adventure, but ministry cover-ups, interdepartmental turf wars, megacorporate revolving doors, these scandals, conspiracies, the race to get a document to the right official before someone buries it. these all have potential to be far more than scaffolding around a story. Sometimes, in the right campaign, pulling the right strings, seeing how things unravel from the mundane to the Machiavellian, with the right group and the right ideas, that could easily be the whole game. So, by now, you get the idea. In my version of the Third Imperium, the bureaucracy is the system that keeps everything running. It handles the paperwork, the clearances, the audits, and the intelligence briefings. It moves cargo, tracks decisions, and holds together the day-to-day workings of the Imperium. Over time, it's become one of the most interesting parts of the setting for me, as you can probably tell. But I wanted more ways to explore that world through character creation. I wanted to build people or characters who came up through the ministries, who knew how to move things through channels, and who uncovered problems buried in reports. Traveller never really gave that experience the depth it deserved, that I thought it deserved, so I decided to create it. When I look back, this is interesting, when I look back through older editions, I found a Bureaucrat career in one of the classic Traveller supplements, because I've been trying to branch out. Like I said in episode 1, I learned this game with Mongoose 2nd edition about 6 years ago or so now. It was during the pandemic. I found Seth Skorkowski's channel, and he was doing a Traveller series at the time. And like he said in that video, in one of the first video he did on it, he was like, where's this game been all my life? And that's exactly how I felt, because I don't think I've talked about this before, but my first role-playing game experience, I don't have the same history that a lot of people do. I didn't start by playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was an adolescent or in my early teens. I didn't really start playing role-playing games until college. And it was the D6 Star Wars game by, I think, West End Games. And Traveller felt kind of similar to that, but in a setting that you could pretty much do anything you wanted with. And I loved that. But with that being said, as I want to kind of immerse myself more in Traveller lore and history, I have been branching back to look at previous editions of the game, looking at classic Traveller, Cepheus Engine, just kind of trying to be a sponge and learn as much of it as I can. So when I was looking back through older editions, I found a Bureaucrat career in one of those supplements, and that discovery became the foundation of this version that I've just kind of tweaked or written kind of from the ground up for Mongoose 2nd edition. It expands the idea into a kind of, for me, a more complete playable path with assignments, ranks, and events that reflect how imperial institutions might actually function. The career it's meant to bring that to life a little bit. And it gives players a way to create characters who understand policy, influence, and procedure, and who know how the Imperium truly operates from within. The Bureaucrat, to me, is the backbone of imperial governance. And these are the officials, the planners, the enforcers who keep the institutions of the Imperium running, like we talked about, across every sector, and enforce policies. And so, I broke it down into 3 paths. We've got administrators who manage departments and oversee the internal machinery of government or corporate institutions. Then we've got regulators who conduct audits, inspections, and investigations, who enforce kind of those laws and internal compliance. Then we've got analysts who gather and interpret information, produce strategic forecasts, and inform decision making at kind of every level of leadership. So kind of those are the three, I guess you call them, assignments within the career. And each of these assignments brings its own path to authority. Administrators rise from clerks to ministers, directing large-scale operations and commanding bureaucratic networks. Regulators ascend through field work and oversight to become trusted enforcers and internal watchdogs. And then analysts climb from data techs to strategic advisors, shaping the Imperium's course through research, insights, findings, and their work, is measured in reports, rulings, clearances, and how they help avoid crises. Success can, bring influence, appointments, or access to high-level briefings. But, failure obviously could lead to disgrace, because we've got, tables for mishaps and events and all of that stuff. So you can get demoted, exiled. The risks are real, but so are the rewards, connections, reputations. I'll release this I'll find a way. So follow me, on social, keep following the podcast, and I will let you know where and how you can get a hold of this new career assignment if you're interested. And because I created this new career path, I think is it administrator, is currently in Mongoose Second Edition is part of the noble career path. So I moved that out into the bureaucrat career path. I created a new assignment in the noble career. And so I replaced administrator with regent. And regents kind of serve with delegated or inherited authority over estates, districts, or planetary provinces, governing directly, presiding over courts, enforcing laws, managing budgets. Some are appointed by higher nobles or ministries. Others rule by birthright or charter. You can kind of like roll, how to get there. And they begin their careers as, I think, arbiters, magistrates, and advance through positions like castellan, viceroy, chancellor, lord chancellor, as they kind of get promoted or not. And their skills blend diplomacy, leadership, policy, political maneuvering, and represent the Imperium in that way. So I just wanted to kind of tweak it. If we're, one of the points of the podcast that I've always talked about is trying to give, thoughts and tools for referees who are curious and as interested in this sort of stuff as I am, kind of ways to bring it to life and kind of flesh out gameplay more suited to core sector, bureaucratic, noble, intrigue, and like I keep saying, that kind of Byzantine nature of how things function. If you're going to be playing a traveler in that world, it'd be nice if there were kind of more roles or backgrounds that lent themselves to, hey, this is a person who grew up in the Corps, went to college or was educated in the Corps, had a connected family. What career paths would they follow? So thinking through that is what led me to kind of take this step. So be on the lookout for that if you're interested. Let you know where to download it or where you can get your hands on it. And reach out if you're interested. And now it's time for the Referees Workshop, where we look at some of the skills that shape play in the core sector. Today, we're going to explore a skill that can be the difference between endless corridors of delay and the sudden opening of opportunity. It's the diplomat skill. As we've discussed almost exhaustively at this point, in the core, power is arranged through words, forms, protocol. It's spoken in the careful phrasing of a request, the timing of an introduction, and the recognition of rank and office. The diplomat skill is what allows travelers to glide through the layers of bureaucracy rather than stumble into insult or obstruction. So picture this. The travelers arrive at the Office of Interstellar Trade to clear a cargo dispute. We find two administrators arguing over jurisdiction, each unwilling to yield. A diplomat plus intelligent roll at a difficulty of 8 determines how the travelers intervene. Success allows them to phrase a compromise in neutral terms, soothing pride and saving face, while the shipment is released without penalty. Failure deepens the quarrel, and the cargo remains sealed until a higher authority is drawn into the fight. Or in the Department of Transportation, you got a permit officer who's buried in paperwork. The travelers need a temporary landing variance for their ship. Have them roll diplomat plus education at, say, standard difficulty, or maybe even kind of an easier difficulty. Just have them roll a 6 or more. And that lets them bring the right words of respect, recognition of the officer's workload, and a sense of, understanding. And that maybe grants the request to make things a little easier for them. So they earn the stamp form in minutes. But if they fail, could end up in days of delay, or a note in the file that these travelers are pushy outsiders and difficult. Or say there's a reception hosted by the Bureau of Commerce, and delegates from rival corporations circle the traveler's patron looking for some sort of advantage. Have them roll social with diplomat, set it at a difficulty 10, and allow the travelers to deflect the sharpest words, turn rivals into kind of cautious partners, kind of grease the skids a little bit to keep their patron's position secure. But failure gives the rivals kind of space to whisper unchecked, and by the next morning, contract shift against the traveler's side, and you got more complications to deal with, right? A ministry office, at a ministry office, a junior aide hesitates to grant access to restricted data. Have the traveler roll diplomat plus intelligence and persuade them that providing the information is safe and proper, wrapped in ceremonial phrasing of the request, right? Success would unlock the archive without a fuss, but failure draws extra suspicion, and the request is forwarded to superiors who now want to know exactly why the travelers are interested in the first place, right? So it's just kind of using that success and failure to amp up complications. It either keeps things moving or creates new opportunity for additional adventure, right? Additional consequence, additional scenes. Because even in the field, etiquette shapes outcomes. So just wanted to give some food for thought there, because, society in the core moves on courtesy, ritual, and the language of influence. And travelers with the diplomat skill can navigate these things. They can go to receptions, ceremonies, have private conversations with officials with relative ease if they have the right skills and the right roles, and are able to kind of turn that formality into opportunity. Offer a respectful greeting, artful toast, subtle turn of phrase. These can all pave the road to patronage, trade, protection, success, allies, rivals, right? Success with diplomat kind of strengthens reputations and earns allies among the influential if you play your cards right. But failure, can create those ripples that spread through rumor. If they've insulted the wrong person, their reputations can kind of take a hit. It's just more ways to just kind of bring these things to life. I see the diplomat skill in the core as a little bit. It's more than at face value, right? You can save deals with it. You can win allies with it. Turn delays into opportunities. It's kind of like pulling strings in a lot of ways. And referees should treat diplomat as a force multiplier here. Success should open doors, and failure should bring scrutiny, gossip, obstacles, and scandal, suspicion, and build those rivals, right? Because that's kind of how power moves here in the core. And in a lot of ways it's kind of like a chess game of how people sort of behave toward one another, the things that they say, the persuasive arguments that they make, where in a setting where kind of every word is sort of measured or scrutinized or greeted with suspicion, right? Diplomat is the skill that kind of transforms social encounters into what could be enduring connections. And the traveler who masters that skill can thrive in this environment and turn protocol into influence that works on their behalf. And, if they don't master it, then they have a harder time maneuvering through some of the adventures that we've talked about today. So hopefully that's a little food for thought for you as you think about some of these, what I usually sort of consider underused skills, or certainly not skills that we talk about much when we're talking about building traveler characters. I haven't traditionally seen a lot of people super stoked to skill up in Diplomat. So maybe this is one of the reasons why you would want to do that if you're making a character for gameplay set in the core. All right, folks. That's all for this episode of Signals from the Core. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and share with your fellow travelers. Have questions, comments, or want to submit an idea for a future episode? You can reach out at coresignalsmail@gmail.com. Until next time, keep your clearance valid, your comms encrypted, and your grav line out of committee oversight. Stay sharp, travelers.